Sweet. Okay, welcome everybody to my chat on live service game architecture on mobile, which is all sorts of fun. So I'll do my little mouse setup. Also, shout out for mods. Love mods. I started with mods. Neverwinter Nights original, Neverwinter Nights 2, and then Dragon Age Origins. So if you're ever modding in either Neverwinter Nights 2 or Dragon Age Origins, you'll probably have read my tutorials. I kind of released a novel of how to do those various modding. So definitely very pro mod. So if you can add modding in, that's always awesome. Okay, so me. Quick warning, starting out. I will try not to swear, but sometimes the filter doesn't quite work. So there may be some swearing here. Again, I'll try not to, but who knows. There may, however, be some very, very implied swearing pauses. So even when I don't swear, there may be mental swearing going on. Okay, so who am I? I've been a professional games engineer for about 8 years, both here in Australia and in the US. I mainly have been in the mobile and free-to-play space. I've worked on everything from small independent teams through to large teams in AAA kind of studios. So I've worked in things like Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes or Simpsons Tapped Out. So, you know, really big ones and then smaller titles like Vega Conflict. I've worked as both a senior client and server engineer, so I'm kind of aware of both sides of it. I preferentially am a client engineer, but I have worked both sides of the stack. Recently, I've just started my PhD on how we can build interactive narrative systems that foster social change and soft skills development, and particularly on mobile devices. And then by extension, how we as developers often unknowingly embed our own values into our code. So that's kind of where I'm at now in terms of the space I'm in. And those of you who have worked with me are also very familiar that I'm a little bit pedantic about my code. And so I have a lot of Anna rage going on. Here's my GIF here. This was a GIF taken from a video at EA, and they decided to make it a bit of a chat GIF. So in chat, you used to be able to type Anna rage and that would come up. So yes, my code rage is a thing and it's real. So yes, that is me. Just a bit of a heads up, I don't have all the answers. What I have here is a bunch of ideas and observations that have come out of my experience. Sometimes they'll work for you, sometimes they work. It really depends on the context of your game, how you're building it, and what features you need. So just be aware that these are things to think about as you go, and some of them will be useful for you and some of them will be not, just depending on the structure of your game. So it's up to you to take what works and is appropriate for you. Okay. Couple of things before we begin. Those of you who know me, I will try and keep this talk as clear as possible. So if you're not a senior engineer or any of that sort of stuff, you'll be fine. It's all good. But it does help to have some familiarity with object-oriented programming and data-driven design, particularly data-driven architecture design. Again, I'm trying to keep it as easy to understand as possible, so it won't necessarily go into that a lot, but they will help you understand a bit more and they'll give you a bit more context for the things that I'm doing. Also, so here's just a kind of a 2-minute, I wrote up a bunch of stuff about various structures of game stuff. Because I want to keep this as engine agnostic as possible, I won't be going into the standard engine bits. Engine optimization is its whole beast unit on its own, and it's often dependent on the engine you're using. So I'm not going to go into that today. I'm going to focus on the things that you as a developer have much more easy control out of, and that can be run on any sort of system. So that's just to give you a bit of context to what I'm doing and how it's all kind of go together. So again, I'll have you answer questions and then I can go and talk a little bit more about optimization stuff later if you're interested, particularly Unity stuff. I've been spent a lot of time in that space. But, you know, happy to talk through that later. But in this case, I'm not going to kind of talk about engine optimization. So let us begin. So why do we need to think about this stuff? So a successful games as a service needs to be on someone's device. So it needs to be on their phone or on their iPad or on their machine, and it needs not to be deleted. So they need to be actually have it there and it can be run. It needs to be used regularly. To help with this, it needs to be updated regularly. And you really want low support and production costs. And then you also want high retention and conversion rates. Now, retention and conversion, that generally you may not have as much control over as an engineer. It often relies a lot more on design. Your designer is taking on analytics and learnings and then adjusting the design and the flow as thing. However, if we can get all these things sorted, so if we can make sure that we've done everything we can as engineers to make sure it's on their device and not deleted, that they can use it regularly, that it can be updated regularly, and that it has low support and production costs, you are much more likely to get high retention and conversion rates. So we're doing this because we're going to try and support as much as we can getting this high retention and conversion, because we really want the games to make money. Like, if they're not making money, you don't have a job. That's kind of where I sit with this stuff. So you have to be making money. It doesn't have to be making squillions. You don't have to go into areas that are kind of ethically questionable to do it, but you have to be making money to keep a job. So you really do want that. So as engineers, we can help with these things, and that's what this talk is all about. So my sort of focus or my general approach to this is about respect. Now, as a developer, we want you to respect your players, their time and their resources. And then as a team, you need to respect your team. You need to respect everyone's time, everyone's skills, and generally their humanity. And by humanity, I'm talking about things like crunch. If we can try and will say this over and over again, if we don't need to be working at 3 a.m., if we can get it done smarter and in more efficient ways. So what we're trying to do here is to take an approach of respect and take kind of this understanding of respect and applying it to how we're building free-to-play games. Okay, so the first idea, to be on their device, downloaded and not deleted. There's a few things that come into play here. Your app size, your initial launch time, and your on-device storage. Now, people kind of are aware of the app size stuff, but those who aren't, I'm just going to put up a couple of bits of information about that. So here you go. The OTA limit is this sort of download, how big an app can be if you download it over 3G or 4G rather than over Wi-Fi. So exceeding that limit can reduce your downloads by 50%. And impacts first install numbers, and you really want to make sure that you don't have that. And then, as it says, for every 6 megabyte increase to an APK size, we see a decrease in the install conversions rate of about 1%. So this app size is really important. And then here we got, you can estimate a linear decrease of how many people will play your game or download it rather, and then subsequently play it. Based on the size of your app. So think about it. The app size is really important. If they don't ever download it, you won't have them playing it. But then there are people who hide it all behind an initial loading screen. So sure, the APK will be, however it is, 25 meg or whatever, but then the actual download behind the initial loading screen will be 2 gig. Please don't do this. This makes me very sad. This is my sweary face. Makes me very sad, and please don't do it. Try and think differently about it if we can. There may be sometimes you have to do it, particularly maybe for tutorial assets, but you don't want to be downloading several gigabytes behind that initial loading screen. Getting into a game quickly is really important, particularly on first play. Like, you need to make sure that you really want to be under maybe 30 seconds if you can. You do not want that time to be long. So if you're downloading 2 gigs of assets out of that initial loading screen, it's really rude, but it also means that they're not getting into the game quickly. So they'll close it and they may not ever open it again. So avoid this where you can. Think about ways around it. So the ways to do this and ways to help avoid this is context is everything. And I'll be talking a lot about context throughout these next few slides. I'm a big fan of context, and I'll be going into how data and context all go together. It's very exciting. So context is everything. What I mean by that is features, you can think of them as units of functionality. It shouldn't matter to the code how these units are mixed and matched. And I'll give you an example, so don't kind of freak out about it. I'll go through an example in a second. And context controls what units are active and when and how they behave and interact. Now, the cool thing about thinking about features this way is that it allows you to expand it much further than just the way we're downloading assets. You can then start thinking about things like, okay, do you have a subscriber service? And if you have a subscriber version of your game, do they have different things on and off? And being able to think of them like units of functionality that can kind of be plugged and played in various ways allows you to think about that, and then it expands to other features. So it becomes a really interesting design technique. So as a bit of an example, here's a screen for one of the first game I worked on, Vega Conflict. And here is the ship factory, and here is the manage modules. Now, they are both the same screen. They are all the same assets. Everything is all the same. The only thing that differs is the data behind it. So we put in different data and different things become active, different things become, enabled, different weapons show up, all this stuff. So different things come, but the actual base UI, all the various bits there, all the functionality, all the code, everything is all exactly the same. And this makes it really good too for things like bug and error checking, because if it exists on one screen, it exists on another screen. But if it doesn't exist there, it doesn't exist anywhere. So it allows you bug check one screen and that covers it for all of it. So, it's a really good approach to also help reducing errors. So think about it when you can do stuff like this. Where can you kind of share that sort of base and use the data to control what is visible, that context? Okay, contextual assets. So download them as you need them. So you need to think about when you're doing this, how your assets are used or accessed. You'll need to think of them, then you can sort of bundle them by that usage. And so it's really important to think about that, because if you're going, okay, they'll be using level 1 altogether, then just bundle all level 1 together. But, you don't need to have level 2 necessarily bundled with level 1. This is just sort of taking that level approach. But there are a whole lot of other ways to split up your gameplay that you can then bundle your assets by use. Remove assets that are no longer needed. So in cases you may, not that you necessarily will, but you may have tutorial assets particularly that, are there for tutorial, floaty finger pointing, glowing things that you may not need later in the game. And if you're not going to have later game tutorials, you may want to remove them. You may have certain kind of opening cinematics that you kind of lead into the game, or that really epic moment. You may not need that on the device. So think about what you're needed and what is needed, and then remove them if you don't need them anymore. You can always get them down later if you do. So for instance, if you say, actually, no, we want a new tutorial on these things, we want those little glowy assets back, then you can. That's fine to do. But if you don't need them, you can remove them. And then also clearly message to the user when you're downloading. Some people do it by the little twirly in the bottom corner, whatever it is, just make it clear. Sometimes in some places, download limits are high, you may not be able to do it, whatever it happens. So keep it clear to the user that you are downloading. Often I've seen games that have a pop that says, background downloading will happen. So, keep that in mind when you're thinking about doing it, and make sure that it's a consensual download so that people are aware of what's happening. Now, the thing that I really like, and the thing that's really, really powerful, is if you integrate your asset manager with your data system. Now, data context can provide the usage pattern. So then you don't even need to think about bundling by usage. You don't have to do that manually. The data can do it for you. And I'll talk a little bit at the end of this sort of slide, a bit about an example of a system that we built to do this. But the data can provide that usage pattern for you. It allows you to determine if an asset is required. So you can have a validator that runs through and goes, hey, that asset's actually never used. And now, while initially in your sort of early stages of your game, this might not be a thing, later on in the game, it probably will be. As the game over time expands, you get more and more assets, various things may stay around that in the end never get referenced. So it'll be able to tell you, what's never referenced, what is never loaded, what is never used. You can then also make sure that you split your data and visual assets. So making sure that you kind of have your data as a separate entity as your visuals, and allows you to kind of think about how you load things in differently. And then more targeted bundles means less patching across multiple bundles. So for instance, if you have an error in an event or a certain thing, it means you can patch that bundle. And if it's an error in the data or an error in the visuals, you can just patch that data bundle or that visual bundle and not have to replace the other. And the reason that's really important, particularly for data is more likely to have little typo errors or whatever. We'll talk about mitigating some of those later, but you may have them. And they're quicker and easier to patch, and they're much smaller download. You know, a 20 kilobyte or 10 kilobyte or even 5 kilobyte update in that teeny tiny little fix over having to re-download a whole integrated bundle that has your visual assets and your data in it. So think about it when you're actually splitting those up, and allows you to kind of keep those updates small and more targeted. So in terms of the examples of things that we have done, in Unity, you can actually integrate your data system with the bundling system. Now, they're getting more and more that way now, and so it actually makes it much easier. But initially, when I was doing this, it wasn't integrated. And so we used our data system and a little build script to actually go through the data system, pull all the bits together, and then create bundles based on its context usage. And it meant that if we deleted a whole section of the game as we were going through and fine-tuning, it was gone. Like, there was no issue to change anything. There was no issue to tweak anything. The bundling system took that into account. We removed it from the data, said these things no longer exist, and it automatically shrunk that down, pulled it out. And the new build was, teeny tiny. It had no issues, and that excess data wasn't there. So it means that any unused assets just don't get bundled. Which becomes really, really useful as you go along. So as you're going about this, think about it. Integrating your bundling with your data is a really useful way to do it, and it keeps things kind of schmick and clean. Another thing to think about, when we're talking about using regularly, you need to think about your resource usage. Your research usage really matters. And this can be everything from your battery use or your storage data on the device. I mean, games that, I had that story about the hiding behind the initial loading speed of 2 gig. When you load up and go, hey, my phone's running out of memory, you load up and you find a game is using 2 gig, you got to think about that. You're going to go, well, do I use this enough? Is it worth it? So these resource usages really matter. So first one, battery use. You don't want to be the top user. More and more now, you can actually have monitoring on all of the various mobile platforms that can tell you how much battery use each of the various apps are using. And if it's an app that you're not really, really engaged with, seeing it as a top user is really not a great thing. You really do not want it to be there and be that top user if it isn't. Like, you need to think about this. So that really is something to think about. So ways around being that top user is to think about having configurable options. So you really want to help keep that usage low. And you do that thing like dynamic frame rates. So, when things are animating on screen, bumping up the frame rates. When it's not, when it's a still, when they're maybe reading a thing, or, when you have a still screen, you can drop the frame rate back down again. You can kind of play with dynamic frame rates to really kind of bump how much you can get out of it. It's also really good. Some of these configuration options are also really good for low-end devices. So it's not just a single win here in terms of battery use. You also get a win with things like low-end devices. So you can kind of use that same plug that you've made for dynamic frame rates and then put it in and say, okay, you're at a low-end device. We'll set your average frame rate a little lower. And so you can kind of play around with these settings to really get the best of both worlds. So having them there is a really useful thing to do. Brightness is a big one. So, you can kind of, if your game has a really dark, you have to really have the screen brightness up high to play it, you're going to be chewing the battery. So maybe thinking about, okay, if you have a really moody game that's really dark, maybe thinking about having some low power modes, or thinking about it when you're actually doing it. GPS use, people will, talk about this a lot. Things like, if you look at the games like Pokemon, excessive GPS use can really, really drain your battery. And unless you're really committed, you go to a point going, look, I really don't need that. So think about how often you refresh your GPS and your positional stuff if you need it. And think about, can you just drop it down a little bit? Can we kind of tweak it up a little bit? Can we extrapolate? So go, okay, you're moving this direction, so we'll just kind of extrapolate and only check X numbers of times. So you can kind of reduce how much is pulling on that, because that can really pull things. Same with Bluetooth, same deal there. Pinging it a lot tends to drain the battery. Graphics. So this again will work with low-end devices as well as helping with battery. Post-processing effects in particular tend to drain your battery life, tend to be doing a lot of CPU kind of and post-graphics processing, GPU processing. So you really want to kind of, if you have an option and go, hey, look, we know this thing, if you don't mind that it drains battery because you need a PowerPoint, you can keep them on. But if you do want to turn them off, you can, and you get longer life out of it, because you don't necessarily want someone's phone dropping off when they're on the train. Like, you want to make sure that they don't kind of kill their battery. So having configurable options around some of these graphic effects can be really useful. Cellular data use is another one. If you really, really heavily kind of span the cellular data, you can drain the battery as well. So think about it. So, again, batch your messages. If you have analytics messages, batch things together and send them off in a bunch. So you're doing it less often. You're not constantly making that connection and pinging things in and sending them out. So kind of think about how you're using your cellular data. And then also one of the ones that's actually biggest too is reading and writing from persistent storage. So, don't necessarily read and write all the time. Think about when you need to do it. Can you load a chunk up, do the thing? And also particularly for things like Unity, it could be slow. So you'll know you'll have a bit of a hiccup in your performance when you're doing that initial read. So think about that again. All of these things have other flow-on optimization effects. So it's not necessarily just the battery use that you're going to be wanking here. You'll be fixing up all these other things as you go along as well, and giving you options to play around with them as you go. So these are really, really useful things to think about. And then maybe having a power save mode. If you say, hey, looks like your battery is getting low, do you want to turn on power save mode? And maybe that turns off all of these things and just has an offline thing, or however you want to do it. It's perfectly reasonable to do that. And again, that could also then go into a low-end device mode. So you could have those things quite, linked. You have similar features across them. So think about it as you're doing it. Data. See, this is a old screenshot. Had a few ones up there. And you can see the phone gives you the access, tells you what it is, when it was last used, and how much it is. It's probably teeny tiny on your screen, so you can't see it. But if you go, say, an iDevice, it'll tell you how big a thing is and when it was last used. So keep only what you need. If you don't need it, don't keep it. And what I mean by this is often for live service events, live service games, you'll have events and things that are kind of limited time only. And you may have assets, particularly UI assets or a whole bunch of things that are only necessary for that event. So you may have sort of backgrounds or visual effects, all these things that are only relevant for that event. If you don't need them, don't keep them around. Have a bundle. We'll have several bundles. One that says, this stuff is used while the event is happening. This stuff, so you may have skins or other assets that may be persistent, so the player may purchase them and then keep them. So you may want to keep those around, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't need to keep around. So at the, make sure if it's hooked up to the data, you can delete the reference or say it's expired, and in your data builder say if it's expired, that bundle is no longer needed. So you can actually automate a lot of this. But yeah, definitely keep only what you need. Where's my mouse? There we are. Okay, contextualized data allows you to move unnecessary assets. That's what I just talked about. I'm ahead of myself. Now, cellular data. Be respectful of their data. So one of the things that hiding the stuff behind the loading screen is a real issue is that some countries have really small data limits. Like, even here in Australia, we're not unlimited. Like, we're not unlimited in our data. So be respectful. If someone's only got their mobile, so they may not have, maybe they're a student or maybe they're, don't necessarily need a huge internet connection because they're not doing high-end stuff, because you can still stream video on your phone and those sorts of things. So they may not need a really high-end connection. So be respectful. If you're going to be downloading a large amount of data, let them know. Ask them if it's okay. Say, make sure you kind of keep this communication happening between you and your user, because they will be really, really, really pissed if they suddenly get you're out of data because this game has downloaded a lot of data, and they will be angry and they will delete it. And not only will they delete it, they will give you a bad review. So you do not want your player to be angry. So be really respectful of their data. And then if you're doing server game saves, keep them small. And one of the suggestions is send only modifications. So this is kind of not so much of a bigger deal when you're first starting out with your game. And while a lot of these things come from kind of my experience with big live service games, often at the end of their life, it's things you can think about earlier. So while, the save game of your initial startup game may actually be quite small, it's only a little text file, it's only a few things, all pretty good. But in 5 or 10 years, it may be huge. So thinking about some of those things now, and even if it's you put it on the list of things to look at as time goes on, that is also fine. But it is something to make sure. Don't just put in the backlog or don't think about it, because we all know what happens with tasks with the backlog. So make sure to keep it on the front of your mind, and make sure you don't set up your architecture to not be able to handle a different way of saving. So don't kind of lock everything into that you have to dump the whole file down, because in a few years, and we all want our games to last that long. We don't necessarily want it to be a flash in the pan. You want that longevity, because that's where, the long-term stability and jobs come from. So, make sure you keep that in mind as you're going along to kind of keep those solid kind of things happening. Okay. One of the things that I think is really important, and people may not or agree with me or not, this is the thing, and it'll come up a couple of times throughout this, is having a strong ID system that allows you to send a hash ID rather than a lot of plain text is really useful. So if you do have a full server authentication system, even if it's just an endpoint that you kind of do the saves and save validations from, if you can have a, even if it's a data system on your server side as well as your client side, you can validate again, means you only need to send small chunks of data. And instead of sending, hey, this person got 100 gems, you can just pass the ID, and it can be obfuscated and it can be hashed, and send that up, and that's what they got. And it makes it a lot easier to kind of keep away. And also, it helps reduce the fiddle factor. So anything that's in transit or on your device can be fiddled with, can be hacked. I mean, we've covered this in the first talk today, and if you hadn't seen the keynote, go back when it comes out on YouTube and watch it. It's really, I'm not sure that one is going to be. Anyway, if you missed the keynote, I'm sorry. But anything on the device or in the or in transit can get fiddled with. That is just the way games are. So be aware of this and think about ways of doing it in a more interesting way, or things that even if they fiddle with it, so they send a different ID up, well, they just won't get anything because they won't have the right ID. And if it's hashed, salted, and it's going to be really hard for them to fiddle with something and make it something that's actually useful. So think about it when you're actually doing it. It allows you to have smaller messages, and it also adds that extra kind of layer of security to that fiddle with factor. So it's just something to think about as you're going along. Okay, regular and high quality updates. So I'm going to talk a lot here about data-driven functionality. And what I mean by that is, so when you have an app update, you usually only want to be doing one of them, maybe maximum one a month. You don't want to be doing, because that's a full process. You have to go through the approval processes. You have to go through all that stuff. It's a whole flow you need to do, and it's quite a time-consuming process. So you want to be able to do things through your data, and they can be patched. Your data can be patched. So you can send functionality that is, I will talk a bit about, the actual reality of it in a second, but you can then patch it through data. And so you can actually have more regular updates than that whole month-long process. So you can, or several month-long process, depending on kind of how it goes. So you can think about that. So data-driven functionality is a really useful tool to use. And I'll talk about some more about that in a second. Remote configuration. This is really important too, particularly for those sorts of things that can be fiddled with, or you may need to adjust and tweak as you go. So things like event values and things. If you notice the balancing is going to be off as the game starts going on, you may want to adjust them. Just a big flick up with anything remote configurable. If you're having an event, you never want to drop things down, like drop things to make things, basically, you never want to drop rewards down. You never want to make things harder for people to do if they've already done it. So there's a whole lot of things. Basically, try not to make your people angry when you're doing it. Don't take things away from them. They'll get really angry and then bad reviews. But it's a really useful thing to have when you need to balance if things are getting through more quickly, or you may be able to add more content on the end of it and kind of extend the event. So it's a useful thing to do. And I'll talk about what remote config options we'll talk about later. Kill switches. are awesome and amazing and incredibly useful, and again, I'll talk about them, and then keeping those updates small. So again, we've talked about that already, and I'll probably just reiterate some of those points here. So data-driven functionality. There's a couple of ways you can do this. Well, one of the ways that's probably the easiest is just to extend your existing data system with rules and actions. And so what I mean by this is you have something like, if they have 3 cows, then you can evaluate it and you do this. If they do not have 3 cows, you do that other thing. And you can expand this to have if, then, or else's and those sorts of things. And so you can have a trigger. So you can have a thing that comes in and goes, woot, there's an event on, cool, check. Do they have the cows? No, they don't. Start the event. If they do have the cows, then try something else and maybe go to the next stage of the event. So it's a little, there's not a lot of functionality in it other than giving sort of values in there, and then the actual game already has the system in it, which then can execute. So it rewires the system to evaluate against. So it's usually some form of persistent and a world state. So it's usually either player state or world state that it'll check, maybe some time state things. So it does have, you need some sort of data to evaluate these rules against. You can't get away from that if you're going to have a kind of a rule system. And you can use your existing data system. So whether that's in JSON or XML, whatever it is, you can then set up data structures that match your system and just run it through. So, you add a bit of extra. So if it is a rule, then you do some other thing. If it's an event, do something else. So you've got that, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel here. You can, if you know that you are going to be using a lot of these and really, really want to kind of develop and push this kind of idea of data-driven functionality a lot, you can also then have a full scripting framework. So if you want a full scripting framework, there's a couple of things to think about. You can use an existing language, something like Lua or Python. There's a whole bunch of pros with this. So there are existing interpreters. You don't need to write your own interpreter. So that's all done for you. Often they're open source, so you can kind of patch and change things as needed. So you can put in your own slight tweaks to it if you need to. Staff training and spin up is often easier. So you can ask when you're hiring people, hey, knowing Lua or knowing Python is really good. That's an added bonus. Or if they've just started, they don't know them, then you can run them through, there's YouTube tutorials at the wazoo, or there's various online tutorials that you can kind of pay for courses that they can do, and they can get them trained up really quickly. So then you don't have to invest in that staff training on your end. So that can be really straightforward. One challenge, though, with that is they are known languages. So if we're talking on the security side, if you don't obfuscate them properly, you may then end up with issues with people being able to kind of play with your scripting side. So if security is something to think about, then maybe using an existing framework may not be the best for you. You'll be relying on plugins. You may be relying on those existing interpreters that you're integrated with, which may have vulnerabilities. So, there are concessions there. It may not necessarily be the answer to everything, but it is definitely something to think about. And, it has all of those pros about, the existing things. You don't need to build an interpreter and that staff training element. Or you can roll your own. Now, a lot of games that I've worked on have rolled their own. And part of that is because it often went from the approach I was talking about earlier, so that data-driven kind of functionality where they just had kind of that event rule system. And as the games expanded, they needed to add more and more functionality. Now, this has a lot of pros and cons, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a second. So there's a lot of room for optimization, but then there's also a lot of room for poor performance. So, if you've started with a data system, you go, actually, no, we need all this extra functionality, and your data system doesn't perform particularly well, you're just adding in those extra performance issues as you go. So as you kind of think about this, if you go and if it's really performant and you spend a lot of time making sure your data system is schmick, fast, runs fast, is smooth, no issues, then it can be fine. But it's just there is that other side of it. Over time, it may not necessarily be as good depending on how it was all built. You really, really, really need good documentation. Because it's not an existing framework, there's not existing videos, there's not existing kind of documentation out there about it. If you have your own custom language and custom rules and kind of all that sort of stuff, you really need good documentation, because what can happen if you don't? On a previous game that I worked on, we had versions, multiple sort of ways of doing the same specific thing. Some of the ways worked, some of the ways didn't work. And the reason why is that no one knew that that functionality had been previously put into the game, and so they're like, okay, cool, that we need to add that new thing, so they added it in, except someone else had already did exist, someone else was doing it the other way, and then by doing it they broke that other thing. And so you really need good documentation, so it's really clear what is available, what people can do, and how to do it. And version management. So this comes into that whole need good documentation. You really, when you have evolution in your language, or as it changes and goes over time, and this is the same with your data system. So you'll need to have version management in either of them. And it's something really important to think about. But it's particularly important for a scripting language, because you want to make sure that if you've done a patch, down on new stuff, that their player saves can run, or this new event data can run across. So there's a whole host of little parts that you need to think about. So if someone has copied and pasted, say, oh, we want to run a clone of that event we ran 3 years ago. Cool, copy and paste. Oh, wait, it can't run because it has the wrong calls in it. So then you need to update them. So you need to think about that version management, and you may have a version transformation script. So that's what I've often done in the past, because you'll often have to version transform things as it goes along. Having a version transformation script is really useful. So each step, so your whole game always ends up staying at the same version. You're not kind of having scripts from version 1, scripts from version 3, and scripts from version 64. So you're not kind of keeping them all running at the same time and then having to keep that system compatibility. You're upscaling the version so everything remains consistent. And that's just something to think about as you're doing it, because when it doesn't happen, you can get 4 or 5 versions of a scripting language running at once, and there can be 6 different ways to do one thing, and one way has a bug and another one doesn't. And so you're trying to track down why this particular instance of this thing and this event has an issue, but this particular instance of this thing doesn't, even though they're doing the same thing. So it can get really curly tracking down issues, and it's one of those ones where you fix something over here and that other thing breaks over here. So you really want to be careful with that as you go along. Okay, remote configuration. So remote configuration is awesome. It can be really, really powerful. Just think about how you use it. So do things like rewards. So if your balancing gets completely wigged out, so someone mistypes 0, you may have to kind of swing everything up 10 or swing everything down. Like, again, swinging down, people tend to get angry about, so just avoid swinging down if you can. You might have to just balance everything up and make things work less, because you're kind of making everything more. So rewards are really thing. Non-premium costs, so resource costs for things. So you may want to tweak, okay, they're really struggling at this point in the game. They're really not getting the base of awesomeness that they want to get. So we may need to adjust the resource costs a bit so it's a bit more affordable for them to get, or we may want to up the rewards for these raids that they're doing here, so it bumps up here. So having those rewards and that balancing stuff being able to be remote configurable is really useful. It means you don't have to wait a month if you notice an issue in an event or in an update that you've done, so you can kind of work it across. XP levels, that's really something that can be really useful, because if people are really struggling at certain points, or if they're pumping through the levels, you want to kind of add extra levels at the end, because suddenly they're reaching level 50 and you only did up to level 50, so you need to do a thing. At that point, you can also start looking at various procedural versions of it, so multipliers of level XPs, so they can just go on forever. But if you want to have specific XP levels, then having them remote configurable is a really good idea. Events and being able to tweak events through remote configuration is really important. It means you can add them, you can trigger them whenever you want. Having that regular kind of content is really important. So, hey, you want a quick event? Sweet, you can just dump this remote config file, and they get a battle royale. They get a little kind of mini competition that happens that everyone gets engaged, because you kind of keep wanting people engaged. So having events that can be driven through remote configuration is really, really powerful. Promotions. You may have another game that you're promoting for, or you're doing cross promotion. So having those things remote configurable so you can turn them on and off is a really good idea, because, hey, their thing might end, so you need to turn it off. And so having that turning on and off is really useful. and transaction reasons. Now, transaction reasons is a really interesting one. So transaction reasons are a thing that I use particularly when you are doing something. So for instance, hey, you get a daily reward and it's sent to the server and says, hey, so-and-so got daily reward of 3 gems or whatever it is. Having a reason that saying daily reward is really useful, because then what you can do is put rules and limits around those on the servers. So if someone goes, hey, I want 10,000 gems for my daily reward, it says, no, you can't do that. Maximum you can get is 3. So those transaction reasons can be useful. However, if you forget to add them in and suddenly people are getting all errors and their rewards aren't happening for some of a reason, usually shouldn't, but it's a good idea then to have them configurable so that you can adjust them as needed. Okay, kill switches are my favorite thing in all the world because they can save a lot of pain if you put them in properly. So what are kill switches? Kill switches are basically things on a server or through a remote configuration that can turn off a feature. And so you really need to you really need to, but it's a good idea to have them built in from the beginning so you can know how to turn on off on a feature as going. Any new feature should have a kill switch, because if you do a release, so particularly if you're doing a full update, going through that month-long update cycle, getting it approved, it goes to release, and suddenly you discover that something horrible happens when it's out there in the wild, that if people who have this building and that building, it suddenly crashes the game and corrupts their save, you want to kill switch that. You want to make sure that you can turn it off and it just happens. So kill switches are really important for new features. Events, if someone makes a really poor decision and releases an event either poorly themed or has an issue, often if you're dealing with international kind of games that run across cultural boundaries, you may not realize that what it is in your game isn't legal in their app store. So for instance, sometimes representations of gambling isn't allowed in a lot of places. So you may need to kill switch that feature for that location. And so having a kill switch there to go off, and if you can regionalize it, then it's a really good idea, off that event, and that suddenly that game is no longer banned on their app store, so you're still allowed to have it. They just won't have that event. So, having kill switches for events can be really useful. Promotions, again, talked about those earlier in remote config, but basically, kill switch any system that can block player engagement with the game. One of the games that I was working on, they had this weird bug that happened with player corrupted saves. And they basically put in a check that said, hey, you've got this corrupted save. You can't play anymore until it gets repaired. Now, that would be fine, except it blocked all their play at all. So they couldn't it wasn't sending the save to the server to go, hey, I've got an issue, repair me. It was just going, hey, you blocked your play. I had to scan through by hand over 2 million save files to go through and manually repair any that might have been broken, because the player saves were broken for those few players that it was broken for. It took a long time. It was not a fun thing. There was lots of server instances running on cloud machines. The tool was really awful. There was a memory leak in it which made things crash. It was just all around horrible and no sleep, and it was not fun. And that was because there was no kill switch. If I could kill switch that, we could have done the scanning, or actually done a fix for the server side of things. So it said, okay, when they request a save, we could do the scan, check, and then send it down repaired. So there was a bunch of things we could have done there that could have been done differently, instead of me having to stay up really late lots of times to try and fix it all on the millions and millions of saves that we had. So it's just something to think about. If it's something that can block player engagement, kill switch it, because you do not know what's going to happen. And if it blocks the game, they can't play it. And again, if they can't play a game, they're not spending money in it. And therefore, one step after the other, it all ends in, we need to make jobs. Okay, keep update sizes small. So we've kind of covered a lot of this already. Contextual asset bundles, split data and visual assets. Visual assets are your largest consumer of resources, so split them by context, patch your data. Again, I've talked all about this. So all that previous stuff comes into how you can keep your upset sizes small. Then respecting your team. Okay, I'm running out of time. I'm talking a lot here. Okay, we're going to go fast. Lower support and production costs. Tools are really important. Good tools help reduce time. So if you reduce the manual times, reducing type of bugs, so whether it's an extra thing or a missing colon, if you can fix that stuff, do it. Autocomplete reduces preventable errors like typos or incorrect IDs. So you don't want to be up at 3 a.m. because a designer had to tweak a feature, the build broke, everything's ruined, and you have to be fixing it. So tools are great. automated testing and data validation. Data structures can tell you what is a valid format, so use it. Use the tools that you have. They say, hey, you've got an error here. Use those tools. It can provide what is valid data. So the data knows this ID is valid. It knows that ID is not. So it can tell you. Use those things to your advantage, because you don't want to be having an event go out and data going out, and then suddenly they go, hey, I didn't get this reward because someone had a typo in that ID. So the data tells you. Let it do it. Let it do its magic. And it can also trace the links and validate the data structure. So if you have an event that kind of flows through a tree hierarchy, you can trace it. Just let the code trend, wander down the tree, and then it goes, I hit a place that I didn't mean to go. Then you know. So, think about that. And then also automating your smoke tests. You have really qualified QA people who are used to breaking things. They really want to break your game to find all the issues. So if you can smoke test, automate your smoke tests, get that out of the way so they can then focus on what they're good at, which is breaking the stuff and doing an awesome job doing it. Okay. Reduce surfer clocks. Now, we had a whole speech on this, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it. If you haven't seen it already, M's talk will go back up online after this, and so go watch it. It talks about how to reduce your server costs. It's an amazing talk, and a whole talk can be done on this. So as she did it, she was amazing and awesome. So watch her talk. Basically, think about it. Free-to-play games need scale to make money. You need to ensure that your game can run affordably at scale. You do not want things to be really expensive as you're running it. So I'll let you watch M's talk, because that was amazing and did all of these things for me. Okay, last but not least, analytics. You don't know what you don't know. Make sure you have it. Make sure you keep an eye on it and track it. Questions? And if you want to hear me rant more about more advanced stuff, feel free to do it. My GCAP talk talks about code generation and all sorts of mad stuff. And I get to put a supernatural GIF in. Whoa!
Nice. Well, thanks for that. That was a great talk, Anna. I love the dynamic frame rate features and your harrowing story that came up in the kill switch. Just reading lines and lines of database sounds terrible. Now, I'm guessing as a modding fan, you're probably really into Lua. Is that like when you pick your scripting languages? Does that come up a lot?
I'm actually a bad. I do tend to roll my own because I'm a monster. So
you like pain? I don't know. Yeah,
I do. But I also then write all of my tools to integrate with it. So it tends to be a whole kind of ecosystem. If you ever talk to Lewis when he's in town, ask him about my madness when it comes to my code, and it becomes this kind of monster ecosystem where everything talks to everything else in this really beautiful fashion. It's lovely. I love it. But yes, no, I tend to roll my own because that's just the sort of way I roll.
That's how you, yeah. Pun intended, I assume.
Oh yes.
So when it does come to rolling your own and the data-driven scripting, have you ever gone visual? Is that something that ever comes up?
In terms of like visual scripting or visual tools?
Yeah, visual scripting for like designers or maybe less technically advanced people.
Oh, definitely. So one of the games that I wanted to talk about, but I was running out of time, so I can talk about it now. We actually created a whole bunch of visual editors in Unity that ran alongside that actually allowed the designers to go in and auto-completed things like IDs. So they could type in, hey, this is a character, and start typing it. It will give them all the character options, and they could just pick from the list, or they can auto-complete and tab, and it will actually auto-complete the name of the ID for that character. So it had all of that stuff in there. So it could be done by typed. So it could type by what data asset they were looking for. It could be typed by a reward type, so something could be given. So it allowed us a whole lot to say, hey, this can be rewardable. So basically the data put a tag saying rewardable. And then it would just pop up in the rewards list, and they could just go, okay, this is 10 of this and 10 of that, and it would just click, 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 click. And so it was really, and they basically, we got in trouble actually because the designers were able to make events and stuff faster than the artists were able to make assets for them. So they're like, no, you need to slow it down. I'm like, but you wanted it fast, so now it's fast.
Well, so, yeah, that's... Yeah, cart before the horse and all of the things that can run away from you as we do that. Now we seem to be running low on questions. Are there any final things that you'd like to say, or where can we find you online?
So I'll be on Discord today. I'm also occasionally on Twitter. I do turn up occasionally. I'm not very good with the Twitters. So, forgive me if I'm not there all the time. But that's at Mythical Sea on Twitter. And you will have tagged me in some of the Technically Games posts. That's always happy to chat there. Again, I'm on Discord as well, so you can always ping me if you have any questions. But you'll see me around. I'm around all over the place. People tend to get sick of me, so it's all good. I'll be around.